August 20th, 636 AD. 100,000 Byzantine Roman soldiers stood in formation across a river valley in Syria, facing 25,000 Arab Muslim warriors. The Romans had professional troops trained in centuries-old military doctrine, heavy cavalry that had crushed Persian armies, and the confidence that comes from being the heir to Rome's thousand-year legacy. The Arabs were mostly tribal warriors fighting for a religion barely 4 years old, armed with swords and faith, outnumbered at least 4 to 1. This should have been a massacre. Instead, over 6 days of brutal grinding combat, a sandstorm hit at exactly the right moment, blinding the Byzantine cavalry charge and allowing the outnumbered Arabs to destroy Rome's army so completely that the Byzantine Empire lost Syria, Palestine, and Egypt forever. This is the story of how 25,000 warriors ended Roman power in the Middle East using weather, persistence, and women who refused to let their men retreat. And if you think this is dramatic, next week we're covering the crusade that was supposed to fight Muslims, but instead attacked the greatest Christian city in the world and destroyed it so brutally that Christendom never recovered. But first, let's talk about the 6 days in August 636 that broke Rome and changed 3 continents forever. The Byzantine Empire. In 636 was what remained of the Eastern Roman Empire after the western half had collapsed 2 centuries earlier. It was still formidable, controlling territories from the Balkans to Egypt, from North Africa to Armenia. Emperor Heraclius had just defeated the Persian Sassanid Empire after decades of war, reclaiming lost territories and restoring Roman prestige. The empire's military was professional, well-equipped, and backed by centuries of tactical doctrine refined through constant warfare. When Arab raiders from the Arabian Peninsula began pushing into Byzantine Syria in the early 630s, Heraclius viewed them as a temporary nuisance, tribal warriors who would be crushed once Rome assembled a proper army. He was catastrophically wrong. The Arabs who invaded Syria were united by Islam, a new religion preached by Muhammad before his death in 632. Within 4 years of the Prophet's death, Arab armies had exploded out of Arabia, conquering Byzantine and Persian territories with shocking speed. These were not professional soldiers. They were tribal warriors, Bedouins who had spent their lives raiding, riding, and surviving in desert conditions. They fought as individuals and small groups, not in rigid formations. They were mobile, adaptable, and motivated by both religious zeal and the prospect of plunder from the richest empires in the world. What they lacked in training and equipment, they compensated for with mobility, motivation, and willingness to die. Wait, it gets better. The Byzantine army that marched to confront the Arabs in 636 was massive, perhaps 100,000 to 150,000 troops. Modern historians debate the exact numbers, but all agree the Byzantines had overwhelming numerical superiority. They had Armenian heavy cavalry, Byzantine regular infantry, and Christian Arab allies who knew the terrain. They had supply lines, siege equipment, and experienced commanders. The Arab force under Khalid ibn al-Walid numbered perhaps 25,000 warriors. On paper, this should have been a slaughter. The Byzantines were so confident they reportedly sent letters to Heraclius before the battle saying victory was assured. The Byzantine battle plan was straightforward. Use their numerical superiority and heavy cavalry to crush the Arabs in a decisive engagement. Heavy cavalry charges had won battles for Rome for centuries. Armored horsemen crashing into enemy lines broke formations and created panic. The Byzantines positioned their army in the Yarmouk River Valley in southern Syria, near the border with modern Jordan. They controlled the high ground on the northern side of the valley. The Arabs occupied positions to the south. A ravine called the Wadi al-Rakad ran behind the Arab position, creating a natural barrier. The Byzantines believed this geography favored them. If they could push the Arabs back into the ravine, the battle would become a massacre. But here's what nobody tells you. Khalid ibn al-Walid, the Arab commander, was one of history's greatest tactical minds. He'd been fighting since the early days of Islam, had never lost a battle, and understood perfectly how to fight enemies with superior numbers and equipment. He knew the Byzantines would rely on heavy cavalry charges. He knew the Arabs couldn't match Byzantine armor or training, so he didn't try to fight the Byzantine way. He positioned his forces to maximize Arab strengths, mobility, archery, and willingness to fight in brutal close combat. He placed the ravine behind his army not as a trap, but as motivation. His warriors had nowhere to retreat. They would win or die. Before we see how this six-day battle unfolded, quick note. This is part of my Empire Killers series covering battles that ended empires but schools never teach. New story every week? Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. August 15th, 636, the battle began. The Byzantines launched probing attacks testing Arab defenses. The fighting was fierce but inconclusive. The Arabs held their positions, absorbing Byzantine attacks and countering with archery and quick cavalry strikes. This pattern continued for days. The Byzantines would attack, pushing forward with superior numbers. The Arabs would bend but not break, fighting desperately, then counterattacking when Byzantine formations overextended. Neither side could deliver a decisive blow. By August 19th, both armies were exhausted from 5 days of brutal combat. Here's the part everyone misses. This wasn't one decisive battle. It was 6 days of grinding warfare where both sides bled constantly. The Byzantines had numbers but couldn't break Arab cohesion. The Arabs had motivation and skill but couldn't drive back the Byzantine mass. Casualties mounted on both sides. Soldiers fought in shifts, resting when they could, then returning to combat. The Yarmouk Valley became a killing ground where neither side could gain decisive advantage. The battle could have gone either way, depending on who broke first. On August 20th, the 6th day, the Byzantines decided to end it with a massive coordinated assault. They would throw everything into one overwhelming attack: heavy cavalry, infantry, the full weight of their numerical superiority. If they could break Arab lines and push them into the ravine, the battle would be over. The Byzantine cavalry formed up, thousands of armored horsemen preparing for the charge that would crush the Arab army and end this rebellion. The ground shook as they began their advance. Then the sandstorm hit. Desert sandstorms in Syria are sudden, violent, and blinding. This one came from the south, behind the Arab position, blowing directly into the Byzantine forces. Within minutes, visibility dropped to almost nothing. Sand filled the air so thick you couldn't see 5 feet ahead. The Byzantine cavalry charge continued into the storm because stopping mid-charge would create chaos in the ranks. But they were riding blind, unable to see enemies, unable to coordinate, sand-choking horses and riders. The Arabs, with the storm at their backs, could see the Byzantines struggling in the sandstorm's edge. Khalid ibn al-Walid saw his moment and ordered a full attack. The Arabs charged into the blinded Byzantine cavalry. What should have been an organized Byzantine assault became a confused melee where Roman advantages disappeared. Cavalry charges require visibility to maintain formation. Heavy armor becomes a liability when you can't see attacks coming. The Byzantines fought bravely, but they were fighting blind in a sandstorm, while outnumbered Arabs, who could see, struck from directions they couldn't predict. The Byzantine charge broke. Units tried to retreat, but in the sandstorm, coordination became impossible. Here's what made the disaster complete. As Byzantine forces fell back, they retreated toward their camp. But the ravine ran through that area, and in the sandstorm, units stumbled into the Wadi al-Raqqad without seeing it. Soldiers and horses fell into the ravine. Others were pushed in by the crush of retreating troops behind them. The Arabs pursued relentlessly, driving the broken Byzantine army toward the gorge. What had been an orderly retreat became a panicked rout. Thousands of Byzantine soldiers died in the ravine, crushed by other soldiers, trapped against its walls, or killed by pursuing Arabs. The Byzantine army collapsed completely. Units that hadn't been in the main battle tried to withdraw in order, but the overall collapse created chaos. Arab cavalry pursued fleeing Byzantines for miles, cutting down soldiers who threw away weapons and armor trying to run faster. The discipline that had held the Byzantine army together for 6 days evaporated in hours. By the end of August 20th, the Byzantine army that had numbered over 100,000 was shattered. Perhaps 70,000 Byzantine soldiers died at Yarmouk, or in the pursuit afterward. The survivors fled north toward Antioch, abandoning Syria completely. But wait, here's the detail that makes Yarmouk unique. During the battle, at moments when Arab lines were weakening, Arab women from the camp behind the lines rushed forward. They didn't fight in the front ranks, but they prevented retreats. When Arab warriors tried to fall back, the women blocked them, shamed them, threw stones at them, essentially forcing them to turn and fight rather than retreat. These women understood that if the army broke and ran toward the ravine, everyone would die. They became enforcers of discipline at the most desperate moments. Byzantine sources mention this with shock. The Arabs' women wouldn't let them retreat. This wasn't organization from command. This was organic, desperate action by women who understood survival required victory. The strategic consequences were immediate and permanent. Syria was lost to the Byzantine Empire. Damascus, Antioch, and other major cities fell to Arab control within months. Palestine followed, including Jerusalem, which surrendered to Arab forces in 637. Egypt, the wealthiest Byzantine province, was invaded in 639 and fell by 642. The Byzantine Empire lost 2/3 of its territory and 3/4 of its revenue in a decade, all because the army sent to stop Arab expansion was destroyed at Yarmouk. Emperor Heraclius, who had spent his entire reign rebuilding Byzantine power after defeating Persia, watched everything collapse. He reportedly stood on the shore at Antioch as his defeated army straggled back and said farewell to Syria, knowing it was lost forever. He withdrew to Constantinople and spent his final years watching the empire he'd saved from Persia crumble under Arab invasion. He died in 641, broken by defeat. The empire survived another 800 years, but it never recovered the territories lost after Yarmouk. The question historians debate is whether Yarmouk was inevitable or contingent. If the sandstorm hadn't hit when it did, would the Byzantines have won? Possibly. They had numbers, equipment, and position, but the Arab willingness to fight desperately for 6 days, the tactical skill Khalid showed in defensive warfare, and the motivation difference between the armies all favored the Arabs even without the sandstorm. The storm was decisive, but it might have only accelerated an outcome that was already probable. The Byzantines were fighting for reconquest of lost provinces. The Arabs were fighting for survival and divine mission. That motivation asymmetry mattered. But here's what nobody tells you about why Yarmouk matters beyond immediate military consequences. This battle established Islam as a permanent political and military force that couldn't be dislodged. Before Yarmouk, Arab conquests could have been viewed as temporary raids that Rome would eventually reverse. After Yarmouk, that became impossible. The Byzantine Empire's best army was gone. Arab control of Syria, Palestine, and eventually Egypt was permanent. The entire political and religious landscape of the Middle East changed because of 6 days in August 636. Khalid ibn al-Walid, the Arab commander, went undefeated in over 100 battles during his career. He fought in the early Islamic expansion, commanded at Yarmouk, and was eventually removed from command by Caliph Umar, despite never losing. His removal came from political concerns that Khalid was becoming too popular and powerful, not from any military failure. He remains legendary in Islamic military history as one of the greatest generals who ever lived. His tactical approach at Yarmouk, using defensive discipline to exhaust a larger enemy before counterattacking at the moment of weakness, became a model studied for centuries. The Byzantine failure at Yarmouk reveals how rigid military doctrine can become fatal weakness. Byzantine tactics were refined through centuries of warfare against Persians, Germans, and Slavs. Heavy cavalry charges, infantry formations, siege warfare. These methods had won countless battles. But they were designed for enemies who fought similarly. The Arabs didn't fight by those rules. They used mobility, avoided set-piece battles when disadvantageous, and exploited every weakness. Byzantine commanders kept applying traditional tactics, expecting traditional results. They got catastrophe instead. The human cost of Yarmouk extended beyond battlefield casualties. When Arab forces took control of Byzantine cities, populations faced occupation by conquerors from an alien culture and religion. Many cities negotiated peaceful surrender terms. Others resisted and suffered conquest by force. Christian and Jewish populations in Syria, Palestine, and Egypt lived under new Muslim rulers who demanded tribute but initially allowed religious practice. The demographic and religious character of the Middle East began shifting from Christian majority to Muslim majority over subsequent centuries. Yarmouk started that transformation. The Persian Sassanid Empire, Byzantium's traditional rival, collapsed completely in the same period. Arab armies that defeated Byzantium at Yarmouk went on to conquer all of Persia by 651. The Sassanid dynasty that had ruled Persia for 400 years was destroyed. Persia became part of the expanding Islamic Caliphate. The geopolitical structure that had defined the Middle East for centuries, the Byzantine-Persian rivalry, ended. In its place rose a new power, the Islamic Caliphate, controlling territory from Spain to Central Asia within a century. The role of the sandstorm in Muslim tradition is portrayed as divine intervention. Islamic sources describe it as a miracle, God's aid to believers fighting for His cause. Whether this was natural weather or supernatural intervention depends on theological perspective, but the psychological impact on both sides was enormous. Muslim warriors saw it as proof God favored their cause. Byzantine soldiers saw it as abandonment by their God. Religious warfare always involves claiming divine support, but at Yarmouk, the timing of the sandstorm made the claim especially powerful. The long-term consequences of Yarmouk shaped world history for over a millennium. The Middle East, which had been culturally Greek-Roman and religiously Christian, became culturally Arab and religiously Muslim. This transformation was started by Yarmouk and completed over centuries of Arab migration, intermarriage, and conversion. Byzantine culture survived in Constantinople and Anatolia, but was pushed back from territories it had controlled since Alexander the Great. The Mediterranean, which had been a Roman lake for 800 years, became a frontier between Christian and Muslim civilizations. The military lessons of Yarmouk were studied by both sides for centuries. Arab commanders learned that motivated light cavalry could defeat heavier equipped enemies through mobility and persistence. Byzantine commanders learned slowly and painfully that traditional Roman tactics needed adaptation for warfare against Arab armies. The Byzantine Empire gradually developed new defensive strategies focused on fortified positions and avoiding decisive battles. This defensive doctrine allowed Byzantium to survive Arab sieges of Constantinople in 674, 678, and 717, 718, though it never led to reconquest of lost territories. The cultural legacy of Yarmouk remains contentious. In Arab and Islamic tradition, it's celebrated as one of the great victories that established Islam as a world power. Khalid ibn al-Walid is revered as Saif Allah, the Sword of God. In Western and Christian tradition, it's remembered as the catastrophic defeat that lost the Christian Middle East. Both perspectives reflect how battles become mythologized differently depending on which side won. The reality was complex. A Byzantine army weakened by recent wars against Persia faced Arab armies energized by new religion and prospect of plunder. Neither side was purely virtuous or villainous. Both fought for survival and dominance. The battlefield at Yarmouk is in southwestern Syria, near the border with Jordan. The Wadi al-Raqqad still cuts through the landscape, a deep ravine that trapped Byzantine soldiers during their retreat. You can visit the area today, though the exact battle locations are debated by historians and archaeologists. Standing there, looking at the terrain, the battle's geography becomes clear. The valley where armies fought, the ravine that became a death trap, the open ground where the sandstorm hit. The landscape hasn't changed much. It's still harsh, still arid, still obviously dangerous terrain for an army caught in a storm. The question of whether Byzantium could have held the Middle East with competent leadership is unanswerable but fascinating. If they'd won at Yarmouk, would Arab expansion have stopped? Or would the Arabs have simply regrouped and attacked again? The Byzantines were exhausted from decades of war with Persia. Their treasury was depleted. Their professional army had suffered heavy casualties. Even with victory at Yarmouk, holding Syria and Egypt might have been beyond their capacity, but defeat made it certain they would lose everything. The parallel invasions that followed Yarmouk demonstrate how one battle can cascade into empire-ending disaster. After destroying the Byzantine army, Arab forces had freedom to operate across the region. They took Damascus in 636, Jerusalem in 637, began invading Egypt in 639, completed conquest of Egypt by 642, and invaded North Africa in the 640s. Each conquest was enabled by the previous. Each success attracted more warriors to Arab armies. The momentum created at Yarmouk carried Arab expansion for decades. Emperor Heraclius's tragedy was watching his life's work collapse. He defeated the Persians, reclaimed lost territories, restored Byzantine power. Then, in a handful of years, everything was gone. He died knowing that future generations would remember him not for his victories over Persia, but for presiding over the loss of half the empire. That's the cruelty of historical memory. Decades of success, erased by years of catastrophic failure. The theological implications of Yarmouk troubled Christian scholars for centuries. How could God allow Christian lands to fall to non-Christians? Various explanations were offered. God was punishing Christians for sins, testing their faith, or acting in mysterious ways beyond human understanding. None of these explanations changed the reality that by 650, the Middle Eastern Christian communities that had existed since apostolic times were under Muslim rule. Some communities survived under Islamic governance, others gradually converted. The demographic transformation of the region from Christian to Muslim majority took centuries, but started with the military conquests enabled by Yarmouk. The Islamic perspective viewed Yarmouk as validation of Muhammad's message. Within 4 years of the Prophet's death, Muslim armies had defeated the two greatest empires in the world, Byzantium and Persia. To believers, this could only be explained by divine favor. The rapid expansion reinforced faith and attracted converts. The military success of early Islam became theological argument for the religion's truth. Yarmouk was central to that narrative as the battle where outnumbered believers defeated Rome through faith and divine intervention in the form of a sandstorm. The 6-day duration of the battle distinguishes Yarmouk from most medieval engagements. Most battles were decided in hours. Yarmouk was nearly a week of continuous combat. Soldiers fought, rested, fought again. Wounded were carried off and replaced by reserves. Both sides adapted tactics daily. This grinding warfare tested endurance and morale as much as skill. The Byzantines, despite numerical superiority, couldn't maintain the psychological intensity the Arabs sustained. When the sandstorm provided the Arabs an opening on day 6, they had enough strength left to exploit it. The Byzantines, equally exhausted, couldn't recover from the setback. The role of Armenian cavalry in the Byzantine army deserves mention. Armenian heavy cavalry were elite troops, experienced and well-equipped. They formed a substantial part of Byzantine striking power. Their destruction at Yarmouk weakened Byzantine military capacity for decades. Armenia itself remained contested between Byzantium and various Muslim dynasties for centuries. But the Armenian military contribution to Byzantine power never recovered its pre-Yarmouk strength. One battle's casualties echoed through generations. August 20th, 636, began with 100,000 Byzantine soldiers, confident they would crush an Arab rebellion. It ended with Rome's Middle Eastern territories lost forever, and an empire that had ruled the region for 1,000 years pushed back to Anatolia. The sandstorm that blinded Byzantine cavalry at the crucial moment became legendary as either divine intervention or extraordinary luck. Either way, it decided the battle. Khalid ibn al-Walid exploited the moment with tactical brilliance. Arab warriors fought with desperate courage, backed by women who refused to let them retreat. The Byzantines broke against determination they couldn't match and geography that trapped their retreat. 6 days of fighting ended with 1 day of catastrophe that changed 3 continents. Next week, we're covering something absolutely insane: the Fourth Crusade. Christian armies were supposed to sail to Egypt to fight Muslims. Instead, they attacked Constantinople, the greatest Christian city in the world, and sacked it so brutally that the Byzantine Empire never recovered. Crusaders destroying Christians, churches looted by fellow believers, 9 centuries of accumulated wealth stolen or destroyed in 3 days. The Fourth Crusade is the most catastrophic friendly fire incident in history. This is Empire Killers, where I cover the battles that ended empires but schools never teach. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Which battle should I cover after the Fourth Crusade? Drop your suggestions below. The sandstorm hit. The Byzantine cavalry charged blind. The Arabs counterattacked. Rome lost the Middle East. 25,000 warriors defeated 100,000 because weather, terrain, desperation, and leadership all aligned at the perfect moment. Yarmouk wasn't luck. It was the inevitable result of motivation meeting opportunity when exhausted opponents made a final gamble and lost everything. 6 days broke an empire that had survived for 1,000 years. That's what happened at Yarmouk. That's why the Middle East is Muslim today. That's why Byzantine power never recovered. One battle, one sandstorm, one commander who knew when to attack, and the world changed forever.